Welcome to the Scrivenery, where myself, Trevor Stamper, and Ed Stanek talk about all things zine production for role playing games and such. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about marketing and about brand identity, and we've brought on a local expert, Linnea Stevens, and so she's going to talk to us about this. She has much more experience than Ed and I do, and so hopefully we can suss out how to do these things well, or at least where to start. So Linnea, could you give us an introduction? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a freelance artist and illustrator located out of Dayton, and I also am an adjunct professor in my spare time. I teach art history up in Columbus, and I also teach history of illustration and comics, which is a lot of fun. As far as like marketing experience, the last few years, I've had the privilege to do marketing and social media management for a couple of different nonprofit organizations. And I've also done a lot of like self promotion and produced a lot of marketing materials for myself in the convention scene and things like that.
Awesome, awesome. Well, so we could just dive right into it. I think. What is marketing, and why should publishers like Ed and myself, or any of our viewers, care about it?
So, marketing, at least in my viewpoint, it's just telling people about something that you have to offer. But I mean, in a clinical sense, or at least according to the almighty Google, it's the activity or business of promoting and selling products or services, including market research and advertising. But like I said, I like to see it as just being able to get the word out about what it is you have to offer, whether it's a product or services or things that, basically just being able to share expertise or what it is you want to tell people.
Very cool. Do you have a couple of examples of this? I mean, is there something that everybody would be aware of that they could ground this idea of marketing on?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different avenues. The more stereotypical ones, of course, are like ads in magazines, billboards, commercials, emails, that sort of thing. But marketing can be even as simple as like having a conversation with somebody about something that you're working on, or it could be social media, of course, is a really big one right now. Um, and yeah, I think I'm just a bit gregarious, so I tend to just talk about whatever I'm working on or things that I like. And if it happens to be something that I'm producing, even better. But yeah.
Okay.
So for someone who's just getting started into marketing, what would be the first step? Where do they start?
So definitely, I would see what your ideal audience is, because that's definitely going to change the direction of how you're going to market what it is you're producing. So whether it's a board game or a zine or illustration, your audience is going to depend on like what it is that you're trying to promote. So being able to identify who would get the most out of your product, whether it's like fantasy gamers or sci-fi role players, or even on a broader scope, just people who enjoy Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever. um, and I think that that's really vital when it comes to understanding not only like how to talk about it but where to talk about it, because somebody who is interested in something like a digital product might not necessarily need to see a billboard for it, that sort of thing.
Okay, so I mean, you talk about the ideal audience. For those of us who work kind of in role-playing games and in this zine space, we're often using like a licensed product, right? We're often using the Dungeon Crawl Classics is our engine, or Morkborg, or something like that. I mean, that kind of has a built-in ideal audience. Is that the limit of that audience, or should we evaluate, well, maybe this would be appealing to somebody else? I mean,
Mm. I think that there's, I guess, a few different types of audiences. There's like the initiated audience who is
okay.
like aware of the kind of realm that you're working in, but then there might be like the broader audience. And I guess depending on which that would also depend on the avenue that you have to use. I guess for Dungeon Crawlers Classics, I think a lot of word of mouth goes a long way when it comes to that kind of content. Um, definitely getting in like convention spaces, even into like local game shops. I've actually had a very like organic experience where my boyfriend and I will be playing D&D at our local game shop, and then they commissioned me to do illustrations for their a couple of their products, like mugs and t-shirts and that kind of thing. um, and so I feel like having when you are passionate about what you're doing and when you're excited about it, and you're among people who would also be interested in it, I feel like sometimes it can kind of like sell itself.
Very cool. Okay. Um, so a creator is already pretty busy building stuff, right? I mean, it takes a lot of energy on my part to write these things, or Ed's part to write his books and stuff. I mean, especially at the pace that you put them out, Ed. And I think we're at 4 this year, right?
uh, it depends on where you start counting, but yeah, yeah,
4
right.
hardback books. So where do we go, or how do we learn more about how to market our own products? How, is this something that we should? Is it something where it's like, well, just go with the flow and you're going to kind of learn it organically as you go over time? Or is there a good primer, or where could we get a leg up to get us moving forward?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I have, I guess, most of my experience has been pretty hands-on and trial and error. So I know for a lot of what I do, when I'm creating, when I'm doing marketing, I try to think about what it is I'm trying to communicate. If it's but I guess as far as like bare basics, I would say having a good understanding of the basics of like graphic design can go a long way, whether you're doing your own marketing or not. Um, I think people are trying to figure out where the best place to market is, and like I said, that really depends on what it is you're trying to promote. I know social media has been pretty rough for creators for the past couple of years. It's kind of gone away from like doing things that people just automatically see in their feeds because they follow you. And it's moved more to like algorithms and trying to crack that code. And that's been very discouraging. So I think a lot of places that people have been turning to are places like Kickstarter or Patreon, where there's like people who can, places you can send people that are going to be able to see you because they specifically want it. But as far as like finding new people, um, yeah, I'll be honest, that's been something that I've been struggling with myself as just breaking into freelancing. Um, I had the privilege to be able to learn a lot about like visual art, graphic design, and that sort of thing, just uh, by nature of what I would have been doing for various jobs. Um, as far as being able to practice a lot of these types of marketing tools, I've had pretty good success with the website Canva. And I know a lot of like graphic designers out there are like rolling their eyes because they can be a little gatekeepy about things like that. Um, but I have found it extremely helpful in just getting a lot of marketing materials out quickly. But it does also have a very specific look that a lot of designers can like see from a mile away. So definitely understanding some of the elements of design, so things like hierarchy or typography or things like that. And like I said, I'm approaching this more from like an artistic standpoint, just because that is my background. So as far as like psychology or um, profit margins and all that kind of stuff, unfortunately, that's not my expertise. Um, I will say though, in my experience with marketing, I did feel pressure and often was influenced, or I felt the pressure to like be manipulative or to like guilt trip people into buying something. And I think that's, a common tactic, unfortunately. Um, and it's also people tend to rely on gimmicks a lot with marketing. But it's like I said, I feel like when it comes to promotion of product enthusiasm, passion, and having like a genuine approach to it, I think can go a long way, because I think people can sniff when you're trying to sell something to them. And especially if you don't care about it, it can come across as really disingenuous.
I think one of
Yeah.
the great environments where you talk about when you're excited, they're excited, the product sells itself. And Trevor and I have talked many times about the tremendous power of game cons in terms of getting your product out there, getting people introduced to it, and encouraging people, hey, use those opportunities. And I don't know if you have any experience with conventions, but I think maybe if you could talk for just a moment to the notion of, marketing is more than just an advertisement. There's a sometimes it plays out as person to person interaction. And
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Mhm.
And you have some personal experience on that. So
I do. That's actually how Trevor and I met.
oh, okay.
We met at a gaming convention. It was great. Yeah, so that's actually the main place where I do a lot of marketing and self promotion is through the convention scene, whether it's comic conventions or arts fairs, because my artwork kind of straddles the line between the two. Um, so I find that it's definitely an advantage that I have as someone who's more outgoing and a bit more extroverted. And I understand a lot of people in like the role playing or the nerdosphere might struggle with that. So it's definitely takes stepping out of your comfort zone a bit. Um, if that's not for you, then there are other avenues that are more like anonymous or online or things like that. But I know from my experience, I've had a lot of good success, even just with meeting cool people and getting to talk about cool things that we're working on. The convention space has been great for that.
Well, I think even for those of us who aren't um, particularly outgoing, I think that one thing that again, to just go back to the way that you phrase it, a thing that you're excited about. One thing that I've found, it is incredibly easy to get a gamer to talk about their game. And so even though a lot of us are not social butterflies, I think if you look at it not from the standpoint of, oh, I've got to get it up in front of people and market my thing, don't look at it that way. Look at it as, I'm going to engage with other gamers and talk to them about this cool notion, and whether it's your publication or whatever, a game that you're running. And if you I think if you think about it in those contexts, it's a bit less intimidating.
Yeah. And I think something that I heard on a podcast recently, and I'll share the name of it in a moment, but it was don't make content just to promote it, promote stuff that you're already working on. And I think that that is really the main difference is, like I said, people can tell when you're promoting something that you actually care about or not. Um, and I think that also puts a lot of less pressure on creators, because instead of feeling like you're like enslaved to, you know, the algorithm or, social media, it's okay to just like make the thing and then talk about it. Some people, oh, and the podcast I was alluding to, there's this illustrator that I really enjoy his work. He goes by Inkspell, or not Inkspell, Inkwell Illustrations on Instagram. His name is Dustin Panzino, and he's been producing some videos for the past year about working as a fantasy illustrator and getting involved in conventions and how to make money as an artist and stuff. And he and another artist friend of his recently did a podcast about like the state of social media for artists. And it was both bleak and hopeful at the same time. And yeah, and that also is related to another podcast that I've been enjoying called Not Sorry Art Podcast. It's by this artist named Sari. That's why she calls herself Not Sorry, because people mispronounce her name all the time. And she also has a lot of good things to say in her podcast about like this idea of having to like market yourself and be your own brand, and how some people view it as a chore and other people embrace it, and just kind of how to navigate that space.
So, I mean, I think you've touched on a couple of really important points there. First of all, is that you're really trying to tell us you need to be authentic about what you're working on and why you're working on it. One of the things that I find frustrating in trying to get make people aware of the work that I go to work on my products is there's not a lot of great easily attention getting venues for that, right? I mean, if I want to tell you, let me show you what it goes into making a product, or here are my thoughts on this, or this is why I've redesigned the way I write an adventure, or redesign the way I present an adventure or an article or something. There's often a lot of thinking on that, and you can't just put that on Facebook and have a long diatribe. Nobody's going to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like blogs are helpful, and then you can direct people to them if they're really interested to go check it out. And
Mm-hmm.
in the role playing space, blogs have become a hugely important tool. They're not as forefront as they are now. There's a lot of vlogs that are more important, I think. But certainly in the last decade, um, you can see a huge amount of kind of this groundswell of thinking about how we do what we do. The old school Renaissance OSR, really, those folks really embrace blogs, and they really embrace talking about the adventure or the mega dungeon, or why mega dungeons are good or why they're bad, or the ins and outs of encounters and things like this and stuff, right? All of this had to do with what they were producing, and they were thinking about what they were producing while they were producing it. They were consumers of the product, and they were also, then kind of reiterators of it as well. And so they were talking about that. That's really helpful to have a literate group of people who understand why you're trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Helps elevate your own product, and we've seen a lot of success by that in Kickstarters, right? People who
Yeah.
run blogs, gamers who run blogs for 5 or 4 or 5 years, and then release a Kickstarter that does 500,000 or $1.5 million or something like that, and it's on the weight of their blog and the amount of attention they've gotten because of it. That's kind of a built-in marketing strategy, right? Talking about the things you love and why you think you should do it differently, is people that kind of eventually filters out. And
I
it's
think that might be related to kind of the ideal audience that I
right.
was mentioning. Now, it's not necessarily you're making stuff for the audience. It's you are putting the stuff that you've already made, and you're trying to find the people who would like it. So it's
Yes.
yeah, so it's kind of the reverse of what people might think normally. And I think also that idea of like uh I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Take a second. We'll get right back to it. Um, Sorry. Talking
You're
to my
good.
family. They just came home. So I'm letting them know that if I can hear them, the microphone can hear them.
Oh no.
Just reminding them. So yeah, so this is, I mean, in that way, you're just putting it out there and hoping that the audience stumbles over you, right?
Hmm.
And if you give it enough time, that happens. And as a matter of fact, that's a strategy I've been hearing lately about Kickstarters, right?
Yeah.
Open your landing page, open it 6 months in advance, open it a year in advance, and then talk about what you're doing and why. Um,
And like going to the spaces where the people who would like this thing are already existing,
yeah,
whether that's advertising in local game shops or it's advertising at conventions. If you've got like if there's subreddits that would find this type of stuff appealing, if you're allowed to do advertisements, of course. Some
yeah,
subreddits don't allow like promotional materials, but yeah, finding the places where the people who would like this stuff already have their eyeballs, I
yep.
think can really go a long way.
One of those places that hadn't struck me until fairly recently. I'm kind of embarrassed that this is the case. Excuse me. Is simply people who have already, assuming that this isn't your first product, people who have already engaged with your past products.
Mm.
And for example, I talked to one person who had done a crowd fund, and I was really impressed with the number of backers they get. And he said, well, this is, I forget the number he gave. This is like his fifth or sixth or whatever. And so each time it kind of snowballed. More, his people who already had backed his previous projects, a fair number of them did the future ones, and they added new ones as well. Well, when I go to conventions, I run a lot of games at conventions. And a lot of times I'll run into players who really enjoy my products, and sometimes they'll maybe go to the Goodwin booth and buy it. And it had not occurred to me until just the most recent con that I went to take a form with me that's a sign-up sheet and say, if you'd like to get on an emailing list where I can let you know as new stuff is coming out that I'm making, put your name and email address on here, and I'm going to start compiling an emailing list for people who like my products. And it was just a small local con that I'd done this at, but even there, I got about half the people who were playing signed up on my email list. And and then also when I just recently wrapped up a Kickstarter, I put in my fulfillment survey, would you like to be kept up to date as I come out with new products, yes or no? About 80 or 90% of them said yes. Okay, so I added all of them to the emailing list too. And so then that, if this is not your first product and you've already engaged with some people, have some way to, as an option, don't do it on the sly, but
Right.
As an option, let them know, hey, if you really like this, let me know if you'd like to be informed as the other one comes out. And a lot of times, if they do like it, then yeah, they're absolutely going to be interested in that. So that gives you a starting point that you can snowball from.
And I think that goes back to the idea of like genuineness of, people don't want to buy something because they feel guilted into it or because they feel compelled in some way, or, heaven forbid, they feel like deceived in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that might be breaking all of the marketing 101 rules. I never went to marketing school, just as a heads up. So it's entirely possible that, is the opposite of what they tell you. But I know for me, one of the things that also helps is to think about like, how do I as a consumer um purchase things? Why do I buy things? Why do I enjoy things? Where am I getting advertisements that actually work? um and I think that, becoming your own customer in a sense and being able to like put yourself in your customer's shoes, to be able to say like, you know would I want to buy this thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think would also, and I mean, hopefully, because you're the one making it, but I think that can also be really effective in understanding, if I'm already in this space, there's a chance that the people who would like my stuff are in this space with me, so I can talk to them, whether that's like, similar like shops or similar conventions, similar festivals, similar Facebook groups, whatever. And again, just kind of like presenting it, leaving it alone, letting people do with it what they want. And, there is something to be said for repetition. The more people get exposed to something, the more likely they are. But there's a fine line, because if people get overexposed to something, like if you're spamming their email every day,
Mm-hmm.
or, they've seen the same ad 5 times in a week, then they're going to block it. So it's definitely, it's good to have repetition, especially on social media, because people forget, because attention span with 6-second videos is like non-existent. But it's also helpful to not overdo it.
Respect boundaries. Show them that you
Yes,
respect them.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and people are busy, right? And
Yeah.
so they may see something, it may pop into their inbox. But I mean, if you guys are anything like me, I mean, I get 200 plus emails a day,
Right.
and I filter out 80% of those because they're literally just junk.
Yeah.
And so,
Or you click the unsubscribe button
Right.
to that email. Yeah. Mhm.
I bought something from this group once. I needed a thing, and for 6 years, every other day I get an email, and I'm finally like, okay, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Right.
This is
Exactly.
I really don't need to see whatever ad this is. I got the one thing I needed. I'm good.
I think with crowdfunds too, I know, so I've heard some people say their conventional wisdom is when you're in the middle of a crowdfund that's active really kind of continues to you want to keep the people engaged. Whereas my thought is, I know if I'm crowdfunding something or if I'm supporting something, I make my pledge, and then frankly, unless you've got something where the status has changed or the fulfillment is done or the campaign is done, I really don't want to hear about it because I've got a lot of other stuff. And so I've always been much more on the less is more with the campaigns that I run. If there's something new that happens, a development I want them to know about, I'll put out an update. Other than that, I figure building excitement isn't, I feel like, necessary among the people who are already pledging. What do y'all think of that?
I think that um yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And especially if you're posting too much, I think it can kind of spoil it a little bit, kind of like, unwrapping a little bit of a Christmas present at a time. And, you want to maintain that sense of mystery and you want to maintain that sense of like, oh, what am I going to get?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people want to know what they're going to get before they pledge money, but you don't want to like give them all of the plot points. So you don't want to give them like all of the artwork, and you want to maintain that sense of novelty so to fulfill when they finally get their thing that they're excited about.
Yeah.
No, I would definitely agree with what Linnea is saying. The other thing I would say is, I think especially for Kickstarter, backer kit, whatever the campaign is, when you're in the middle of those campaigns, there's really two types of those campaigns that I see. There are campaigns that are meant to groundswell, right? They're intending for that to be big, and you are along, the audience that jumps onto those are they want to be entertained, right? They want to see you hit really big milestones and double the length of your book and stuff like that. But I have to tell you that as someone who's tried those things himself, if you don't hit, if you're not going to have a campaign with a product that's going to be popular enough to do that, that is a death knell to the product. You could quickly triple the cost of your items without realizing it, unless you've really done your research on how much things cost. And so that's something you have to be really careful about. And the other thing is you don't want to release something. You don't want to hit a stretch goal or something in the last 24 hours or something, and then realize that not enough people could take advantage of it. And so you could release stretch goals that are like, oh, this is an add-on that we're going to now provide. But if it shows up too late, nobody buys it. And so even though you hit it and now you're obligated to produce it, the moment one person goes, yep, I want it, right? You're suddenly like, I'm locked into this, and it didn't produce the boost that I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've tended to totally jettison that type of approach unless it's a digital fulfillment item, something that I can fulfill and I don't have to print or I don't have to hand make, or something like that, right? I mean, if it's me fulfilling a digital thing, that's often not as expensive as if I had to produce something else. And so I just put everything up front. I find that to be the more honest thing. This is what the product's going to look like. It's this many pages with, and the art budget's going to grow or swell, depending, because I'm going to have more profits, which means I can spend more money on art because I'm going to, because I have a little open spaces, and I intuitively just want to fill those things, right? And so you just have to trust that that's what my product looks like. And I show people what that should look like. Yeah, it can be problematic. Is my point, I guess, is you have to be really careful how you organize those things. But you're right. My as a consumer, as a Kickstarter, and I've backed over 380 orders now.
That's awesome.
I have the little super backer tag. And so as
Truly
someone,
a supporter of the arts.
yeah, truly a supporter of yours. As somebody who supports a lot of Kickstarters or has historically, um, I am almost, I'd say 90% of the time, I'm a fire and forget guy. I want to back it, and then I want that product to show up. And I do read updates and things like this, if I have time. But sometimes they just get shuttled to my Kickstarter folder,
Oh,
and I can't get to that one that day because I got a really busy day.
mhm.
And so, yeah, and then there's a couple, just one or two, where I really want to be there for the ride and enjoy that experience. But I find that it's very far and few between. I, I I can't imagine that there's a lot of people who like spend their days thrilled that we're going to get to up, we're going to get an ad on this today, and do the same thing for every single Kickstarter. That would be exhausting.
Well, and let's be honest. If there's someone who's that excited about your product, they're going to be buying your product without you
Yeah,
uh, building up hype for them.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And on the backside, you deal with those on Kickstarters, right? You get over attentive, really engrossed backers who, I mean, I have a backer who up in for 5 or 6 Kickstarters in a row. I think I've done 11 now. There was a period of time for about 6 Kickstarters where I would get on average 20 to 30 emails from him during the campaign.
My
And that's
goodness.
like that sometimes it was 3 a day and they were 3 or 4 pages long. Like, I mean, 3 or 4 typed pages long. And you don't want to ignore them, right? I mean, because that could go poorly.
Yeah.
And they're taking so much time. They're clearly there's a reason why they're motivated to write you.
Mm.
And so you want to at least give them the due respect of reading it, understanding what they're trying to say, take pull the salient facts out and respond to the couple things that really do need responding to.
Hmm.
See, if they're
Um,
that passionate, bring them on your team in some manner.
I was gonna say, like, encourage them to write their own stuff or to work for you.
There
and
you
Like,
and
go.
that's what and I do that. I'm like, look, if you really are passionate about this, I will coach you, right? I mean, I'm not gonna spend like hours a week, but I can give you some advice on how to get going and everything and stuff. And I'm more than happy to do that kind of thing. And by the way, we have a podcast. Um, we're nearing 50 episodes. That's over 60 hours worth of content on how to produce this stuff. You should watch it. Yeah. So
hey, that's marketing right there.
that's marketing. Go check it out and look at it. And so, yeah, and it is, and Ed and I have seen that because we do get recognized for the Scrivenery from
Well,
Create,
awesome.
which
Yeah.
is the target audience, right? I don't think Ed and I started in on this thinking, oh, we're going to get thousands of people who just love DCC and they're going to watch our product. It was Ed. When we just shrugged, that was what you want. That's what you wanted out of it.
Oh, no, no, no. No, I was like, I was just kind of resituating myself in my chair. No,
Oh,
I
okay.
totally agree. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, but we do routinely get, emails, or I meet people at cons and they'll be on another podcast and they'll be like, oh, well, the people who inspired me were the Scrivenery. And
Oh,
so that's the reward, right? I'm like, we reached one person. We won.
that's right.
that actually reminds me. So I've done a few conventions the past year or so, and then, I post them on Instagram and stuff. And my students, I teach at an art school, and so they just had their first like within school comic convention. And so a couple of my students were tabling and selling their art, and they were like, "We're just like you." And I was like, "Oh,
Oh my
that's
gosh,
so
how cool is
sweet."
that? So where was this?
I teach at Columbus College of Art and Design.
I mean, so it was there at the school, the
Yeah.
convention.
Hmm. Hmm.
Man,
It was a
I
little
think that would
funny
be a
because
I
it
think
was
that would be a
kind of
super
like
cool thing to go to.
it was like all of the artists were buying art from each other, and so it ended up turning into like just a giant bartering
Wow.
system. But I thought it was great.
Yeah. So, if a we talked a little bit, obviously, that we got a little diverged off of that, but there's a lot that you can do on your own, but sometimes you just don't have time for that, right? I mean, sometimes it's all I can do just to make it through a week, and I may only get a couple words on the page. Sometimes I write 10,000 words in a week, and that's a really great experience. But oftentimes life gets in my way. So if I can't do my creation plus do the marketing stuff, how do I go about finding somebody who can help? Are there, how do I figure out how to partner with a marketing person or a group? What do those relationships look like? What are some of the things to look for in a marketing person?
That's a great question. So I would say definitely when you're starting out, it would be beneficial to maybe work one on one with a person, maybe someone who does freelance, um, because I mean, they're probably going to charge less than like an entire marketing firm for one. Um, but also, I think having that kind of finding someone that understands your product and also understands your audience or the audience that you want to reach, I think is vital. Somebody who has a good understanding of graphic design, someone who has a good understanding of which avenues would be most beneficial to pursue, whether it's in person, whether it's conventions, whether it's social media. Um, Also, having someone who um, comes from a very like genuine place, and I think sometimes marketers kind of exist in their own bubble, and instead of like actually understanding what the audience wants, like film pre-screeners are infamous for this and that sort of thing, or like the people who have like workshops to figure something out, but like people don't actually like the thing. So I think someone who has their finger on the pulse of whatever community you're trying to market to, I think is vital. um, and there's going to be different marketing freelancers who have specialties in um, different areas, so to speak. um, yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Sure, it does. I mean, you mentioned areas. Are there a couple areas that come to mind?
Yeah, so whether it's, specifically for, role playing, that's one market, versus maybe board games might be another market. Now there's a lot of overlap, so it's possible that they can, do both. Versus maybe someone who's doing more like cosplay, or someone, who's doing like holistic medicine, or someone who's doing yoga, like there's all different ways to like market all of these different products.
Mhm.
So finding someone with a portfolio, um, they'll typically have them on their website. Finding someone with a portfolio where they have clients who at the very least are in the same field, whether it's like publishing or a nerd kind of sphere, I think can be really, really beneficial. Yeah, if they have a good portfolio, if they seem engaged in your product, if they it's that same idea, if they care about the product, then they'll know how to market it, and they'll know who would also care about it.
So one of the things that you said there that kind of got me thinking as you were talking about, if you're a small time producer, especially you're starting off, you're not going to engage with some big marketing group necessarily. You go for someone who's doing more small scale. So I'm thinking in terms of those of us who are uh, at a smaller end of this. How how do we come to a point where we ascertain, is this going to be a net gain of an investment for me? For example, my last Kickstarter campaign, I got this. I got several, but one stood out. I got this ad from some group or whatever saying, "Hey, we can raise the profile of your campaign, and it'll only cost you this much, and we'll get you this many backers, and so forth and so on." And just a little quick mental calculation, I thought, I don't. Even if that works, I don't think that's good money spent for me. Broadly speaking, how do I come to the conclusion that something is going to give me a positive return on my investment to in terms of increased sales?
That is a great question that I don't know how to answer. um, yeah, I think for me, at least in my experience, I do all of my own marketing. So for me, it's a matter of how much time am I willing to invest in this thing. Um, so yeah, that's a really good question.
Trevor, do you want to jump in on it? Because you seem to have some, oh yeah, I've been there kind of look.
Oh, I definitely get those emails every time I run a Kickstarter, and I delete them.
Mhm.
They do come across as a little bit like scammy to me, because
Yes.
Well,
I've also had like with my Instagram account, I've had people be like, we can increase your followers. We want to partner with you. And I don't know. It feels like very like you could have sent this email to anybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Well, and
and
they
I'm sure
and
they
they
do.
clearly and clearly they are, right. They're going through, and what I almost always see them do, Ed, I don't know if you've noticed this, is they'll kick in $1 on your Kickstarter.
Mm,
They'll back you for $1. And the reason they do that is because then they can direct mail you. then they'll send you their form letter, right? You get that as an email. And then later, if you don't respond, they'll just
See, I haven't gotten that.
yeah, I used to get them all the time.
Uh huh.
And every once in a while I'd catch one who forgot to unback me and I'd get their dollar. But
Okay.
so in that way it's a net success. I'm a dollar richer than I was
Okay.
before. But those guys I don't pay any attention to. And the reason I don't pay any attention to them is first of all, I rarely I'm going to say something and it might come across as odd or sound strange. I rarely pay much attention to unsolicited advice from people I don't know.
Oh,
Hmm.
agreed.
Oh,
I don't
so
think that's very odd to say.
No.
okay, but and I didn't, but so I think the I don't know part is the important part, right?
Hmm.
Um, sometimes I'll be doing something, and as a matter of fact, quite often, I'll give you a good example. My last Kickstarter, there was a Kickstarters are frustrating, as Ed knows. Linnea, I don't know if you've ever run a Kickstarter, but
Not yet, but I have
yeah,
plans.
there's
We've
this
got back
period.
episodes on it. Check them out.
Yeah, go
Excellent.
check out the back episodes. There's this point in a Kickstarter when you've hit your initial peak rush, I think, assuming that things are going well. You've hit your initial peak rush, and then there's this doldrums. Now that doldrums can be really flat, or it could be slightly elevated, and for me, and it can be hard to tell the difference because when you're checking your updates, I mean, when Kickstarter's active, I've had to teach myself to walk away from my Kickstarters during the day.
Yes.
Like I allow myself to do two things. A, to respond to emails because I get notified when someone specifically sends me a question,
Hmm.
right? I will go to Kickstarter if I have the time and respond to that immediately, or I have a duly designated time in the evening at a certain point, well before my evening ends. Like usually, like I have a cutoff. I have this general rule cutoff of 5 p.m. I make no decisions after 5 p.m. that are important.
Hmm.
I don't talk about
It's a good
money after.
boundary.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't talk about money after 5 p.m. I don't talk about property after 5 p.m. I do nothing after 5 p.m. And the reason is it's almost impossible to solve it by 8 a.m. the next morning,
Hmm.
right? Especially money problems. I'm not going to solve them in the next 8 hours. It's just not going to happen. And so if I do talk about them late into the night, I can't sleep and I value my sleep. And so by stopping it at 5, it gives me some time to decompress from that stressful event, forget about it for a couple hours, hopefully, get some sleep, and then tackle it in the morning when I'm fresh and I'm usually not as panicked. If that happens to be the situation, it's a rule I've had since I was about 20, and when I was young and I had no money, and I was often panicked about it. And there was a period of time where it was really important in my life, and it's just stayed. So with Kickstarter, I will check things in the morning. Yeah, are things going well? I will maybe check them in the afternoon if I have time. Otherwise, I'll check them about 5 or 6 in the evening, usually right before I eat dinner or right after I eat dinner, and then I try and walk away from it for the rest of the day.
You're not just like refreshing it until your eyes bleed.
Oh,
No.
it is
There's a
so
great temptation too.
it's so
I'm sure.
tempting to
Yeah.
do that, and all it hurts is you. It never is a good enough boost for you to go, oh my gosh, that's it. I sold. It's like I won the lottery. I've never seen that happen to me. And so yeah, it is just incredibly frustrating. And so I tend not to. But I will have. I've digressed. I will talk to people about doldrums or problems or, gosh, I made this mistake on the Kickstarter. I forgot to make an add-on. Suddenly you have a request for people who are like, what if I want to add this, but you don't have an option for that, right? And once is one thing. I might say, oh, that's I don't want to. That's not things that I consider compatible, or maybe I'll make it compatible or make it an option. But sometimes you get little cycles where you get 5 or 6 people at once. Sometimes you don't realize you haven't got an add-on. Nobody else has noticed it yet, or they haven't talked about it, and one of my friends will get on there and notice it and then send me emails. So, or call me. So like Nick Barron calls me and he'll say, Trevor, I don't think your Kickstarter is doing as well as it could. And I'll say, thanks, Nick.
We're shutting the
Really
armor.
appreciate it. I
Only
really
friends will tell
appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah.
I was thinking that myself. It never does as well as I think it could. And but he'll say, but here's why I think it isn't doing as well as it could. and I think we can make a course correction, right? And so that is unsolicited advice from somebody I know and who I know knows what they're talking about because they've run a whole bunch of Kickstarters.
Well, I'm going to ask him to review my next one when it launches and say, hey, what's going to pump me up?
There is nothing but good help that can come from having people who you trust, who know the pains of that type of a marketing tool, work through it with you, and make sure that things are going the way they should, right? And you should never. I mean, you know, we're zine creators. We're DCC zine creators, so we're a niche of a niche.
Right.
Um, I mean, like we're really just a crack on the wall. And so, the truth is we should be reaching out and helping each other anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's a good sign of a healthy community when people do send me unsolicited advice of things they see where I'm erring, and feel comfortable in doing that. That I'll probably respond in a positive manner, and care enough that they're willing to do that. And I think those are important things. So yeah, so I welcome that kind of criticism all the time. And Yeah, but that's my answer to your question. I totally went in like your fashion, but never respond to those people. Just don't. It's not worth your time. But I also do look for marketing on my own, right? If somebody's like, well, this is why we have Linnea on the show, because she was clearly we got to talking at the convention. She clearly had more experience than I did in this topic. I was like, well, I mean, I could use the podcast as a reason to learn more from her, and hopefully build a relationship, and stuff. So it's a totally greedy way for me to get an episode in. But I mean, that's what it's for, right? I mean, that's it. Uh, you know, what about websites? We talked about Kickstarters. We talked about doing things in person. We talked about cons. We've talked about things like that. I totally agree with everything that's been said. You should run events. You should get direct on the ground feedback. You should find out whether people hate your product or love your product, and you should find out why they love or hate it. And then you need to evaluate whether you're producing products for the same reasons the people who like them want them produced, and whether there's a big enough market to support that, or do you just not care, right? But for those of us who have websites, and I have to tell you, I have a website for Smoking Worm, smokingworm.com, by the way, everybody, go check it out. Except you will find that it is 5 issues behind on updates, because it is the bane of my existence to have to update websites. I absolutely hate it. So how can we, you know, how can you make updating a website? How can you make maintaining it a useful thing?
Sure. I think that's,
Want to
yeah,
do.
I think that's another thing. And this depends on whether you bring someone on or you do it yourself. So that would be another task that someone who helps with marketing could do for you. Um, if they want to make the website for you, or they tweak it and then they show you. That could be whether it's a short-term contract where they make it for you from scratch, or a long-term contract where they make it initially and then they'll periodically come in and update it for you. I think it really depends on um, them understanding what it is that you need. And I think another good thing to look out for with a marketing person is if they have an awareness of whether to draw a contract so that there's clear expectations of from what they're giving to you and what they expect from you and that sort of thing. But on the topic of websites, that's actually pretty relevant because I just made my own website like in January. I'd made websites in the past, but I don't think I hadn't made a website since college. And so I did a lot of like on the ground learning earlier this year. And I had done website maintenance for a few other companies that I worked for. So I wasn't like completely green. That was one of my tasks as marketing director or digital media director in the past. Um, yeah, so website updates, for better for worse, they are very important. They're important for making sure that the products that you spend a lot of time working on are actually available. And that's like built-in marketing right there, is just showing that it's available on your website. But I say this very hypocritically because I've got stickers and prints that I've made and sold at conventions that aren't listed on my website yet. So I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
um, Another thing that's really helpful. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of like website design, which is something I enjoy. One of the things that I think a lot of first time website creators, a mistake that they make is putting way too many tabs, way too many menus, and then way too much like content on a page so that it gets overwhelming and people don't know where to click, people don't know where to look. And it can be difficult when you're, maybe you want to have like a tab for each adventure that you're doing or a tab for each podcast that you have. And that's the beauty of sub menus. So, you've got buttons that open up to other buttons, but they're still like within the header. Um, Another thing that's also really helpful when it comes to website design is um, typically less is more when it comes to the design of it, especially when it comes to things like colors. I know when I was in college and I was first making my own website, I used way too many different colors and way too many different fonts. And it looked terrible. And you never want the website to like distract from the content. You don't want to, give people a seizure because you picked neon green. Um, and, picking just a couple of colors that you can do various shades of, it can help things look cohesive. Um, and then just picking one or two fonts. You can play around with how bold it is or if it's italicized, that kind of thing. But yeah, you got me talking about design, which is like my favorite thing. So
It's okay because
yeah,
because in a way, I mean, good design is good marketing, right?
yes,
If
100%.
if you haven't designed it well, and I guarantee you, my website is not designed well, um, then I haven't marketed it well. So it's a tool that's sitting there languishing in my back pocket that I could be using, but I hate working on it. And so maybe that's the thing to think about as a small time creator is to go, you know, there was it one of the Tim Allen shows? Um, I watch old sitcoms and everything sometimes to keep myself awake. Um, but there was I remember this episode where the Tim Allen character had a business and he was an old pro at it, and his wife was starting a business and she was tearing out her hair because there were all these things she hated to do, and Tim simply looked at it and in character and said, "That's why you hire people to do the things you don't want to do." Right. And I remember watching it going, oh, well, now I know why they hired me at the university. But you know, but I mean, I think it holds true, and I should probably find somebody to update my website and do that work for me.
That's why you
And
hire nerds.
right,
But they're just nerds about different things.
that's right, that's right. So yeah, because it's just to me, it's like it's like pulling teeth, and I
Mhm.
don't want to do it, and I do so much of that thought process on Kickstarter, or I have a Patreon now, so in my Patreon, I do these updates. There, it seems actually much more intuitive. The website
Mhm.
I'm using, it's got Byzantine, it's designed to be much beefier, and it's got obviously it's like having a Cadillac, but I only know how to drive a golf cart,
Mhm.
Well,
right?
maybe part of your solution is you need a different host provider that has more intuitive tools.
That's what I was gonna suggest.
That
Which website creator did you use?
So I've been using WordPress.
Oh.
Right? Look at that.
well,
So
well,
there,
there you
there,
go.
there's the answer. Mainly because when we started this, it was so ad hoc. It was just me and my
Yeah.
buddies, and I have one of my buddies knows more about these things than I do, and he actually works in web design and running web things and everything as part of his livelihood. So
Mhm.
for him, that's simple and intuitive, and this tool set is perfectly robust and it does everything he wants it to do. I don't I only engage in websites as so far as they take me places. I've never had a dream of building. I have no problem. I have dreams of building content, but I don't. I never. The dream has never involved like writing code, right?
Yeah.
I think that like any other aspect of this, you need to look at it from the standpoint of um, if a thing is not where you want to be spending your time, then that that thing needs a different approach. I spent 11 years as a software developer. I could write my own HTML if I really wanted to. For my website, I just use Wix and just do the online designer that they've got because I'm just making a brochure. I could make a very detailed ASP uh, database driven website. That's not what I'm interested in spending my time doing.
Right.
I also used Wix, not a sponsor, but
Hmm.
yeah, I for me I found it the most intuitive as far as like drag and drop. Um, I'm very like trial and error with my design. I like try a bunch of different things. I look for like negative space. I look for, is the text doing what the text is supposed to do? And so that's one of the things I appreciated about their interface. It requires like basically no coding.
Literally no
um,
coding.
yeah.
Mm.
And so for a couple of the companies that I've worked for, they also used WordPress, which is why I like cringed because I don't, it's probably a weakness of mine, but I don't have a background in coding. I don't have a background in like HTML and things like that, which I probably should. Um, but so it made like working with WordPress extremely difficult. And it feels like their design software, which is called Elementor, I think. It feels like it was made by coders and not by designers.
Yeah.
So I found it extremely frustrating. But there are other folks who are more inclined to that kind of brain space who love it. So,
Right. And,
it's,
and it has
yeah,
become a powerhouse on websites. And the thing that keeps us there, I think, is that we are designing, I've got friends who are programmers who are, wanting to help me design tools like character generators and stuff. So, one of the problems DCC has is an addiction to a website called Purple Sorcerer, which, by the way, John Marr, I'm not dissing it. It's wonderful, right? But you don't carry my custom character classes or eds, I bet, right? And that's just because it's a one-man operation. He doesn't have the time. And so one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is actually put in character generators for the custom character classes and stuff we put out in Smoking Worm and things like that, because that would be helpful, right? If someone could generate first level, second level, third level characters, they would see more use. They would become more useful. And WordPress seems to be robust enough under the hood to do those types of things and hold those databases and stuff like that. I don't know if Wix is, but see, this is where I'm so out of my element that I'm literally just throwing words
mm-hmm.
across the internet at you, and I have no idea what they mean.
Well, and that's a good point too, is like the type of tools and things that you need for, a website like yours is going to be completely different from mine because mine
Yeah,
is like purely image based, portfolio based, like here's just my art. Here's a form if you want to, commission me for an illustration. Here is my bio. It's very like very basic, which is great, and that's why like Wix was helpful, was because it's a very basic website generator.
It's a good
But
brochure site.
yes.
like you said.
But for yours, I think it would make sense to have, because I remember working with WordPress, there are a lot of tools, a lot of apps, and a lot of things that are very helpful for a more robust, um, technologically driven type of website. um, I just wouldn't be the person to hire for
Oh no, I
that.
totally get it. I'm not the person to hire for it because I obviously can't get it done.
And
Um,
I think that requires a conscious examination of what purpose do I want the website to serve?
That's
What
a
is it
great
going to
question. Yeah.
accomplish for me? For example, I haven't dived into um, Wix has mechanisms for where you can take payments. I'm not doing any e-commerce on my site. I'm doing all the e-commerce through drive-through. I don't need to handle that through my site. I'm much more pleased with having it on a site like drive-through where they handle all the movement of money and all that stuff, and I don't have to worry about that. So my site is just a brochure. You go there, here's my product, here's shows all the different books. You click on it, gives you a bigger description, gives a button to go purchase it, and it takes you over to the website on drive through to where you can purchase it. So you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose that my website is going to serve? Don't just think in terms of, well, this is what people do with websites. No, no, no. What are you wanting to do with yours? Because that's going to be totally independent of what someone else might want to do with theirs.
Yeah. And so,
Related to that, I think though it is helpful if you just have like no idea where to start to look at creators or look at websites that are similar to what it is you're wanting to do.
Absolutely.
So like when I was making my portfolio website, I looked at other artists' portfolio
Hmm.
websites. So yeah, I think that's totally valid that, it's you don't need to look like everybody else, but seeing how they organize their
Can
content,
give you great
seeing what,
ideas.
yeah, absolutely. No.
Hmm.
I mean, so that's a general strategy that we encourage a lot on the Scrivenery, right? Do your basic research. Whether it's looking at different websites and saying, I hate that, I like that, this looks interesting, oh, that doesn't look interesting, or writing you're writing an adventure and you need to know about ice storms, you need to go look that up. NOAA has a great website, by the way, with over 20,000 words and descriptions of different weather patterns, just in case you need to look it up, which I had to once. So yeah, so do your due diligence, right? And I haven't had gotten around to doing it. Actually, I've been ignoring it like the plague because it's just there's only so many things I can do in my life.
I feel that.
It's websites are not going to be one of them. I'll just have to find someone to help me. Okay, so we've talked a ton now about marketing. We've or at least yeah, an hour's worth of marketing, and and we've given hopefully our listeners some ideas on where they might go and things they should think about and why they might like to bring a marketing person on board and what that marketing person might be able to do for them and things like that. The other thing that we wanted to talk to Linnea about tonight is brand identity, right? And so if we just default down to Google, we'll give you a Google definition. Refers Brand identity refers to the unique characteristics that influence a brand's perceived personality, appearance, and behavior. Linnea, can you take it from there? Tell us about brand identity? What is it? Why should we care?
Yeah, so brand identity is super interesting to me because it basically is a way to communicate to your audience, your clients, or whatever, what it is that you are selling, what kind of artist you are, what kind of creator you are. And it's having an understanding of like the elements and principles of design, graphic design in particular, and how to manipulate those tools and those principles to communicate effectively. So that was a lot of, uh, esoteric graphic design, yada, yada. Basically, um, the colors that you use, the fonts that you use, the shapes that you use, the logo that you use, it's all going to give your audience a particular idea of who it is that you are. So if you're, I think Goodman Games has done a really good job of understanding the type of content that they're making. So it's like very pulp inspired, very like mid 20th century pop culture inspired. So I can definitely see the references that they're taking. Um, and their graphics are detailed enough to harken back to all of that like Pulp Fiction kind of stuff, but it's also distinct and clear enough to where I can identify if something is a Goodman Games product. uh, so it's having a consistent language, a consistent rule book, if you will, of stuff that you're going to use, whether it's colors, fonts, your logo, and it's something that's consistent that you can use across your products, whether it's labels, your website, your book titles, um, and that's something that I really enjoy making for people because I know the power that like just a font choice can make. So I do a lot of like really nerdy art history research when I'm creating a brand identity. So, like for Goodman Games, I'm sure whoever designed all of their stuff was doing a lot of research into the types of, you know, 20th century pop culture media. But for another company, like maybe an art museum, you know, maybe they want to do something more classic. So they might look into like typography from like the Renaissance. Now they still want it to be like legible. So they'll, you know, introduce some more like contemporary aspects of graphic design for legibility. But they will incorporate like motifs or colors or things from like the Renaissance era. I know for me and my brand identity, if you will, it's actually like evolving. That is one thing that's helpful to know, is that it's okay to like tweak your brand identity over time if you find things aren't working, or if you want to, you know, just kind of move things in a slightly different direction. That's okay. Brands rebrand all the time. That's why we have the word rebranding. Uh, and so I know for me, like, I knew I wanted to convey something like fun and whimsical and artistic, but I also didn't want like the focus to be on the branding itself. So that's why I kept a limited color palette, just like um, greens, blues, and pinks. But I kept them like more muted so that they wouldn't compete with my artwork. But I felt safe using colors like that because I use a lot of those same colors in my artwork. Versus another strategy I've seen a lot of artists use is they just have a website that's like only black or only white so that their artwork just like really pops out. Um, so yeah, you got me going again on the design.
Okay. Okay. So how should we as creators think about this brand identity? I mean, is it something that we can sit down and write a style guide to? Is it something we should think about before we produce our product? Is it something that we should really consider once we've made a product? Where do we start? How do we start?
Yeah, that's I think that's a really great point of being able to think about this identity before you make a product. So that way, you don't have to like superimpose it afterwards. Like, let's say you've already like published some books and maybe you want to like start a series. Well, whatever choice you make for that first one, if you want to maintain a sense of consistency, then you've got to make that same choice throughout like the following issues. Now, like I said, things can always change, and maybe you republish, you know, an original volume because you learned some lessons about graphic design along the way. Um, but yeah, I think having a clear picture of like how you want your product to look in the long run, how you want people to feel when they see like your logo, for example, what it is you want to say about who you are as a creator. I think being very intentional about branding, being very intentional about, you know, your presentation, I think is extremely helpful, and something that was something that actually gave me a really big leg up when I first broke into the convention sphere. Was I did have experience with like um, brand identity, so I was able to create one for myself. And like I said, I'm still tweaking it, but that was one of the things that even at my first convention, I had a few people come by and were like, "Oh my gosh, I love your display! Like, I love, you know, it looks very professional." And I'd be like, "Yeah, this is my first convention." And they're like, "What? It looks like you've been doing this for years." So it's kind of like what we were alluding to earlier about, you know, having that polished professional look is marketing in and of itself.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the elements of brand identity? Is it just a logo? Is it more than a logo?
Yes.
Um, let's
Yes. Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
talk to me like I know nothing about brand identity.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So the elements of brand identity are, like I said, they're the rule books. They're the consistent things of stuff like font choices. So I
Mhm.
recommend just picking like at the most two fonts that you use consistently across everything that you produce, in and out, whether it's your website, the title faces of your books, you know, just using the same two, maybe three fonts. If you've got like specific titles that need to be a bit more like artistic, you know, like for like a magazine title or whatever, you know, you can have like a consistent logo for each story. That's totally fine. Um, but yeah, just having a consistent typeface or font across everything goes a really long way. Having consistent colors also very, very helpful. Um, so not going crazy and having like a bunch of billion different colors, especially like within your website or within one product, but having like consistent colors, a consistent color scheme, um, that you can have variety with, depending on the publication. But when it comes to like if you're making labels, um, things like that, just having consistent colors, consistent text goes a long way. When it comes to logos, one of the mistakes that a lot of people make when it comes to logo design is they try to like cram way too much information into a logo. They'll have like 10 words in a logo or like 20 different colors or like these super intricate shapes. And it might look fine if it's blown up on a billboard, but if it's like, a monogram on a t-shirt, like you can't read that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to logo design, having something that's like clever, something that's identifiable, something that is able to communicate at least the essence of something, but it doesn't have to be like fully articulated. You can always add more text, but you can't like take it away. You think about something as simple as like the Nike swoop, and everyone knows that it's Nike A because they've paid billions of dollars in marketing, but but it doesn't even have a shoe on it. It's
Absolutely.
just a shape.
Mhm.
And with something like Goodman Games, their logo is text based. And that makes total sense, especially because of the era that they're working from. They're playing into like the magazine or the comic book cover titles of like that kind of gritty kind of aesthetic. um that's another thing is like depending on what kind of direction and what kind of look you're going for, it's totally awesome to look at examples of graphic design in the type of realm that you're wanting to work in. So for Goodman Games, you've got pop culture of the 20th century. um I know for me, like, let's see, I've got a couple of books here. Second. If I'm doing, if I was creating a logo that maybe had more like Art Nouveau influence, then, I can pick up a book like this, which just has like historical examples of like Art Nouveau. And versus like if I wanted to do something like vintage sci fi, there's like different types of fonts that I can see that they're using, and I can take inspiration from that. Um, you know, Something similar here, you've got this same magazine has this like logo, but they've got it on like every magazine, So having that sense of consistency and that kind of like identifiable nature goes a long way, and it creates a sense of unity. I hope that answers your question.
No, no, it absolutely does. So as a matter of fact, when I was doing academia stuff and we were producing presentation posters, I did about over 130 of them in the time I was in academia. And when it started out, it was just like, oh, hey, have you got the logo for university? Oh yeah, I have it. And it would be in the wrong format. It would be in a GIF or a TIFF or something. And it was just never worked with my printer, and it always came out pixelated. And by the end of my time in academia, we were being sent to branding sites for the universities, and the universities were like, you may not change these things. You must use this shade of gray. You must use this shade of yellow. Here
Yes.
is here is our logo in all the high end PNG files, and this is for it on a dark background, and this is for it on a light background, and this is for it on a hellscape or whatever it is that you need. We
That is
have
exactly, yeah, that is exactly brand identity. It's
yeah,
the consistent look and feel, whether it's logos, colors, specific like hex codes, which is like the numerical codes for individual
for color.
colors,
Yep.
hmm based
So
on like
so
CMYK, that kind of thing.
yeah, so one thing that our viewers out there could do is, I don't care what university or what brand you're looking for. If you Google brand name, brand identity, style guide, you will
Yes.
come to
Yeah.
their website and it will show you how to brand, how their branding works. It works great for universities because I was often working with colleagues from across the world. And, invariably at 3 a.m., I was trying to get a poster done, and I needed their logo on my poster to print at 8 in the morning. And they're asleep, so I'm not going to bother. I'm going to go look at their website and just put it up there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and that's one of the things that you can think about as you're doing this, I think, is when you get to the moment where you have that conversation. I need to have a brand. I need to have an identity. Codify it,
Mhm.
and then don't forget where you filed that, because that's really important to know.
Yeah,
Um,
just type out the like actual name of the font that you're using, no matter how
yep.
weird it is. A good website to find fonts that I really recommend is dafont.com. It's DAFONT.com. I learned about it when I was in college and I've used it a lot. There's just a whole bunch of fonts that you can download for free. Some of them are like licensed, so you have to pay for them if you're using them commercially, but others are like free for anything. And they've got a lot of great categories on there. So if you're going for more of like a sci-fi feel or more retro feel, or whatever, that there's a lot of great fonts on there. Also, another really important thing to keep in mind is the importance of when you're picking your colors. Um, think about contrast. So you want to make sure that your text is going to show up on whatever background.
That's why you
So
have logo for what light
yes,
background, logo for dark
right.
background.
And
One.
Yeah,
it's okay to do like multiple. If you do make a logo or you have someone make a logo for you, it's really beneficial to have several versions of that logo. So you can have like a black version, a white version, a color version. So that way it's a lot more customizable to whatever you're printing it on, or whether it's going to be on the internet or whether it's going to be on a billboard. You want to make sure it's a good quality so it doesn't get pixelated when you try to stretch it out. But I also want to make sure it's readable when you've shrunk it down. So yeah, there's so much, but it's all like really, really interesting and nerdy and fun to me. So.
One subtle little thing from the contrast standpoint that I think oftentimes doesn't get any consideration. We talked about this when we did the online seminar, and Caitlin mentioned that there's I don't remember if it was a website or a tool, a software tool that she was talking about. I think it was a website where you can you can put in a graphic, and it will simulate for you what does that graphic look like for someone who's colorblind.
yeah.
Oh,
10% of the male population has red-green color blindness. So when you're thinking in
Most of them
terms,
don't know it.
when you're thinking in terms of color contrast, um, that's not insignificant. So
yeah, that's a
keep
good
things like
point.
that in mind.
Yeah, that's definitely important for like accessibility and things like that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's an easy thing to do. Adobe has a tool that you can use within their tool suite. That's what you're really paying for, folks. And but there are also websites you can go to,
Mhm.
and everything to learn more about accessibility, and color blindness is a major part of accessibility.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you know,
That's
and
a great point.
it's not just men, but
It's the
there are,
higher proportion.
but the higher proportion is
Hmm.
men, and there are many different types of color blindness.
Hmm.
So that's the problem. Is it's not like, oh hey, just always avoid red and green next to each other, although that's important.
It's
Um,
the most common one.
it's the most common one. There are other types of color blindness
Hmm.
that you need to consider as well. And the nice thing about these tools, if it's a good version of the tool, is it will step you through the different types of color
Mm.
blindness. You can see your image, whatever it is you want to have them look at, reproduced in the way someone would perceive it. The amount of research they've gone into to produce that tool tells you how important it is,
Yeah.
right? Because they're literally showing you the perceptions of a very small minority of the population, so you can understand what it is you're creating and what it means to somebody. But it can be a huge deal.
Yeah,
So,
that's excellent to know about. I actually hadn't heard of that, so I'm going to be running a lot of my designs through that now.
yeah, yeah, it's a real great tool to work with. And again, most of them are free. So you just go out and look for color blindness tools. And if you have the Adobe Creative Suite, it's in there. They have a color blindness tool, that you can go work with. So yeah, so we're talking about fonts, illustrations. I love your suggestion of getting reference samples and looking for the things you like. As a matter of fact, I know, for instance, Goodman Games does that, right? Goodman Games is well known for the colors they use on their covers. They're often very bright, they're very bold, but they're reminiscent of the Wonder Tales book you've got there.
Mhm.
Tale, basically science fiction and fantasy magazines from the 40s and 30s and 50s.
Mhm.
And I know they're important to Joseph Goodman because at one point he was a direct seller of the Astonishing Tales hardbacks.
Oh my
The
gosh.
reproduction of every hardback or of every color for every cover from like Analog and Astonishing Tales in these huge deluxe hardback books. You could get them off the Goodman Games website.
Oh my gosh.
$125 a book. I mean, they were wonderful to behold. And as a matter of fact, there's many other versions of this. I collect art books from like people like Frazetta, Boris Vallejo, right? Um, and all sorts of people and everything because I'm often looking at that in mainly for inspiration in my
Yep.
creative processes, right? What am I thinking? As I've been working on Earthcrawl, I've been buying movie design books. So these are the design processes behind movies like Blade Runner 2049 and the original Blade Runner or Alien or Aliens or Indiana Jones or whatever. They have these books out there. You just type in, your movie plus movie design book and it'll pop up.
Yep.
And there's
And I,
tons of
yeah,
artists. Yeah.
I definitely recommend using like books or ebooks as a resource,
Mhm.
especially now because of the flood of like AI generated images that are showing up on like Google searches or Pinterest or, places that historically I would have looked on to find like reference photos or inspiration and things like that. Those have become a lot less reliable now that they've become inundated with like images that are like in the style of this or that, but they're like not actually authentic. So I definitely recommend going like old school, go to the library or, find, there's this great website called archive.org that has a lot of like physical books that have been scanned from libraries. So you can access all of these books for free. You just have to sign up with like any email address. And that's also been a fantastic resource, especially if you're working with more like vintage or, old style kind of stuff because a lot of those books, were made in like the 20th century. I've even found like old comic books on there. Yeah, it's a great website, archive.org. But then, yeah, just going to the library, finding art books, like you mentioned, I have like a whole collection of like animation art books from different like animated films or video games. They have,
That's right.
yeah,
The video game companion art books
yes.
that often show the sketches that the illustrators produced, not the final production, right? Not the final
Mm-hmm.
visualization, but the sketches that they were
Yes.
producing
Mm-hmm.
to evoke the style and the feel of those art books or of those video games. Those are actually really interesting. The other thing, if you're really into things like logo design and everything, is there's a website, it's a company called Standards Manual. And so it's standardsmanual.com, I believe. Standardsmanual.com. If you go there, these are graphic designers so intensely interested in graphic design that they will go back and reproduce to the letter standards volumes, manuals that were produced in the 19th or 18th centuries.
Wow.
Everything. So, like the New York subway system, which they created Helvetica for that, is my understanding, right?
Hmm.
And they had an entire campaign in the city to explain why Helvetica was the font to use, why it should be built the way it should be built, and they have books that talk about they basically reproduce the original standards book for Helvetica for the New York subway system, but then also then talk about how that has evolved over time with all the different permutations of the subway design and everything, or
Mm.
NASA, the worm logo.
Oh yeah.
They have a NASA standards. They actually have a couple NASA standards manuals and things like this. So there are ones that are just on. There was one featuring a New York design firm that designed most of the logos that we think of today when we think of classic television, NPR, PBS, and all the people. There's this one company that produced almost all of those all of those logos, the peacock, right, or the CBSI logo and everything. All those were designed by one company,
Wow.
and so they produced the standards manual showing all the different designs these people produced over their like 60 years of production.
Wow.
Um, when the books come out, they come out and they're rather pricey. You can find them secondhand on eBay for a third of the price. So go look there. But they're fascinating. I mean, they are literally historical documentation of what the thought process was. And NASA had a major rebranding campaign when it moved to the worm logo.
Mm.
The space shuttle was new, and the worm logo was on it, and everything and stuff like this, right? And so it's just fascinating to look through those programs and see what they were thinking.
And I
So
hope that like all of this wealth of knowledge isn't like overwhelming anybody.
yeah,
Because like when it comes to like graphic design and brand identity, the last thing I want people to feel is like intimidated or like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. But I really like, what you suggested of just like, doing a Google search, doing, understanding the kind of consistency that brands have when it comes to the lookbook, basically, the style guide. And even if you don't know how to like make one 100%, just creating some, basic guides that, like I said, you can always tweak later, or, consulting with a designer and getting feedback, paying them for their time, of course. Um, or if you have a good friend that you can, take advantage of their knowledge, feel free. Uh,
yeah.
um, but there's one artist I wanted to point out in particular who is like, basically an expert when it comes to like style guides and branding and rebranding. And her name is Jessica Hische, um, Hische is her last name. And I've been following her designs since I was in college. She specializes in like expressive typography, like text based logos and things like that. And she is just a wealth of knowledge. She's very giving as far as like outlining her thought processes, outlining, why she picks certain colors or certain shapes or certain, fonts. And so she is almost like a master class in and of herself of like learning about style guides. So I definitely recommend her website, recommend looking at her portfolio. Um, and yeah, she's just a really cool person who's really, really good at what she does. And she teaches other people how to be good at it. So she's very inspiring.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we've provided you with a lot of ideas on how to think about brand, and where to go to find stuff, all the way to the public library. And you should go to your public library. Um, I go every so often and sit. And actually, usually when my daughter's at school and needs to go do like in-school testing, I will go sit at the library for 3 or 4 hours, and I find it very rewarding to go there and disconnect from my computers and write. Um, so you've got a lot here. This is a fire hose in terms of brand identity, right? But let's we're getting close to the end here, obviously. Linnea, what do people get wrong about brand identity, right?
Mm.
Where are where should we have the fail safes
Yeah,
on?
I think a couple of the things, like I mentioned before, you need to make sure that you're very limited with your fonts. That is one thing, a mistake that I see a lot is people going font happy. um, and also, like I mentioned, when it comes to designing logos or feeling like they have to cram everything into a logo, um, which isn't necessary. I think also, like I said, consistency is very important, but it's also okay to tweak things as you go along. It's okay to switch things up. I also wanted to mention, like, even though I say, limit your color palette, pick your colors wisely, when I'm saying that, I'm talking specifically about the brand identity of like your marketing materials. So whether it's your logo, your banners, a postcard, things like that, that's where you want to be very limited. But let's say you're producing series of different books, it's totally fine to have like different colors across your covers, customize them, individualize them, go wild, especially if the art style calls for it. It's just having those key few elements of your logo or your fonts where you're able to take the chaos of your individual products and you're able to unify them.
So a good example of that might be, and this is really getting into the weeds for DCC people, is if you look at the logos that Goodman Games has used over time. They started with the Triceratops, the Bronchosaurus Rex logo, which is an outline, kind of a shadow logo meant to be reminiscent of the Wizard logo from TSR. They moved to a close up of an actual. It's not a Triceratops, is it?
No,
It's
and Joseph gave the name, and I don't remember what he called it.
I don't remember what
So
dinosaur
dinosaur
it
I've
is.
never heard of, but anyway.
I've heard of the dinosaur, but I forget it at this moment. It's a very specific dinosaur that Joseph happened to find a huge model of that he could work with, and then they modeled the modern dinosaur logo after that. And
I'm sure the
every
dinosaur nerds are like typing it in the
Right,
comments as
right,
we
right.
they
speak.
are right. So and it's heresy. We should know these
I
things.
know.
We're
I'm so
bad people,
sorry.
Ed. We're bad people.
I've always known that.
Um, I've always, yeah. But if you look at that, you can see those logos and that branding change through time because
Yeah.
Joseph Goodman has got, basically it's his 20th anniversary this year. So he has 20 years worth of publications that if you go back and look at them over time, maybe buy a humble bundle so you get like 100 of them at a time for, $30. And you can see that stuff change over time and reorient itself. And that's a really good living example of that. For if you're looking for a gaming example, the other one would be TSR, right? Think of how they change the D&D Dungeons and Dragons logo or
Mhm.
the TSR logo itself. Those are two, one's a company, one's a product,
Right.
right? And so it's more like an imprint,
Yeah.
and everything. But also then think of the different game worlds within,
Right.
old TSR, right? Planescape is different
Hmm.
than Dark Sun, which is different than Spelljammer, which is different than Greyhawk, which is different than Dragonlance, which is different than my mind is a blank right now.
Ravenloft and
Thank you,
Akadem, each of which have
Ravenloft.
their own flavor.
All of which have their own flavor, all of which have their own look, and that's exactly what we're talking about with brand identity.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you can create those strong suggestive motifs, and what that is it's feeding in kind of the lizard brain in the back of your
Hmm.
head and saying this is familiar, this is
Yes.
not.
This is kind of like this, and that is kind of like that.
Do
And
you
yeah.
That's
think
right.
part of that consistency, do you think there's some value to having the same set of artists in your
Yes.
products over time? Because I've settled on to there's one particular artist now that I've settled on for doing my covers because I love the way that I love her style, but also now I feel like now this gives me some consistency. They have a certain feel to them, and same thing with interior art. I feel like if you have a certain set of artists that you're going with for your interior art that has some, just like you open up the DCC book, there's there's a couple different artists that you're seeing time and again in the DCC rulebook, and you become familiar with those. It becomes part of what you come to expect.
Yeah, and we can see that a lot just with like even classic comic books. Stan Lee famously, he said he wanted all of his artists to draw like Jack Kirby, except for Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko could draw like Steve Ditko, but everyone else needed to draw like Jack Kirby. And yeah, now we have like, because Kirby, he was so brilliant and he was able to like have a consistent it Marvel comics looked consistent because a lot of them were drawn by the same person or people who were imitating the same person. So yeah.
Right, because like early Jim Steranko is a Kirby imitation,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, sorry, that was my
No, you're
comment.
fine. Or you even think about like the consistent look of like 1980s Sword and Sorcery, and that's because like half of it is Frazetta or like Ed Beard or
Or
other.
Basuma, right? So
Right.
when you look at it, John Basuma did the majority of Conan the Barbarian for over a decade. Every month, that guy churned out had to be 60 pages of Conan the Barbarian between Savage Sword of Conan, the big magazine that was always in black and white, so it was just black and white line art, and then Conan the Barbarian had 275 issues. So while in the beginning they had Barry Windsor Smith, John Basuma quickly took over and there is like a 100 issue run of just John Buscema. So for a decade, John Buscema was Conan the Barbarian, and there are people who, you can see that people imitate either John Buscema Conan or Barry Windsor Smith Conan. You can go back and see that. And so yeah, and it's to this day across different publishers, right? It doesn't matter who you are.
Right.
And Conan fans can look at it and go, oh, it's a Basuma, and that's great, and they're just happy, right? Or it's a Barry Windsor Smith, and knockoff. And so yeah, absolutely. So those are wonderful brand identities. So, well, I mean, we have
Hire
covered,
artists.
yeah, hire artists, right? Absolutely. I truly believe that. We've covered a lot of material, and I mean, we got to be getting close to 2 hours, hour and 45
Here
minutes.
I was afraid that I wasn't going to have enough to say.
In Scrivenery, we never have that problem. We can always go on and on and on.
So many times I have the same fear, but yeah, it never comes to fruition.
You've never failed.
Yeah.
So I think we should bring this episode to a close. I want to thank our guest, Linnea. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you about these things. Hopefully everybody understands that, we're all varying levels of experts on these types of topics and stuff. And you can be too. And it's okay. It's okay to just dip your toe in the well and take one or two pieces of this advice and run with it for a while, and then maybe come back to the show and watch it again and pick up another piece. One day I will find somebody who can do websites for me, and I don't have to deal with it. And so I will do this. I will take my own advice in that. Ed, as always, it's been great to sit and chat with you and get our ideas across. And hopefully, for those of you, the viewers out there, who do listen to the Scrivenery, you've drawn some inspiration from this, and hopefully tackled a topic you don't often think about, but it is vitally important to your success. Linnea, if people do want to contact you, where can they get a hold of you?
Sure. So there's a few different avenues. I'm on social media, mostly Instagram and sometimes on Facebook. My handle is at Artness, ARTNESS, by Linnea. That's LINNEA. And then my website, it's the same thing, artnessbylinnea.com. I can also be emailed via my website. And there's forms there for people if they want to contact me there.
Wonderful. And other than doing art, are you willing to do this kind of marketing and brand identity consulting and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't work for free, but yes, I am at Thank you. I do have some examples of some logos that I've designed on my website. And so, like I said, I do have some experience with that. And then also you can just see my own marketing for my own self on my website. So yeah, I do have a commercial illustration and consultation available at this time.
Awesome. And go look at the art because it's great. It's nice and refreshing, actually. I think it's
thank you.
Very kind of bright, and the lines are clean. I really like it. It reminds me a little bit of Tim Sale work from comics. If you're a Tim Sale fan out there.
I get a lot of inspiration from vintage comics. It's one of my favorite things. So
and I think that's it.
All right.
Everybody, have a great evening.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
joining
so
us.
much.
Thank you.